Hi, I'm Glyn Jewis, and in this short session I want to take you through the process that will mean what you print will match what you see on your screen. Now, printing is something that baffled me for years. Whenever I tried to print an image that I'd worked on my screen and it turned up on the paper, it would always look different. It would either be too dark or the contrast wouldn't be there. The colours would be perfect because I'd done what everybody told me to do, and that's calibrate your monitor and that will sort everything out. It didn't. Clearly there was more to this. I actually gave up on printing and just kept sending stuff away to a lab to get printed, and even then I wasn't 100% happy. So I returned to this a few years later, and that's when I found out that there's only really a few key things that you need to know, and those few things that are really simple will make a huge difference. That's what we're going to go through now. Now, there is lots more information that I'd like to share with you. We can't go through that in this 30-minute or so session. However, if you go to my website at glyndewis.com, I have a free printing guide that you can download there that will take you through the whole process step by step. Now, also in this session, I'll keep referring to another video. That's a video that's recorded before this one was done as a live broadcast. You can find that over my YouTube channel. Anyway, that's enough of me. Let's crack on. So first of all, let's just have a quick recap. What monitor am I using? All right. So first of all, the monitor that I'm using is this one here. It's a BenQ. It's a 32-inch monitor, and I kind of went through what the spec is about this thing here, but one thing that I really love about it is the fact that the screen hasn't got any kind of shine on it whatsoever. It's got a real matte kind of finish to it, so I'm not going to be influenced by any light hitting that screen and causing kind of reflections and whatever. So I love it, absolutely love it. Yes, I am associated with BenQ, but I was using their stuff beforehand. So whatever monitor you're using, you're going to want to get it calibrated. Now, the calibrator that I tend to use, there's a couple that you could use. Now, I'm going to go through and show you how I use this one here. This is the i1 Studio. The reason I like this one is because this one will not only calibrate my screen, but it'll also allow me to profile my papers. And we'll talk about that in a moment. You do have options when it comes to getting profiles for your papers, but I'm hoping you're really going to see why, at the very least, you need to send off to get them. Not download them, but to actually send off a test print to get some done. So there's this one here. Other ones that you could use, things like this is an i1 Display Plus here, does the same kind of thing, but this, although it does a great job calibrating your screen, it is limited to that. So you can't do your profiles, your paper profiles, but you could send off for them. So that's a great bit of kit. Obviously quite a difference in price depending on what kind of commitment you want to make to it, but at the very least you want to do that, because that is, calibrating your screen is a vital part of this process. If you don't do it, it ain't going to work no matter what you do. All right. The other little thing I want to tell you about before we get into the settings and stuff that you need to do, because I'm really going to make this so incredibly simple. You're going to be like, is that all I need to do to get my prints working? The printer. What printer do you use? Now, this is the one that I currently use. I am going to be getting a larger format printer when we move. I got this one because I'd kind of backed off from doing a lot of prints in the past because I just couldn't get it right. But last year, made the commitment, got this, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. Now, when it comes to printers, you know, we're going to go through what kind of settings that you need to, well, I keep doing that, settings that you need to put into your, to create these profiles, whatever, to put into your printer to print stuff out. However, if you are using a printer that is like the one over my shoulder just here, this little Epson thing just over there that I generally use just for doing like printing out Word documents and labels and stuff like that. It's only got 4 inks in it. If you're expecting a 4 ink printer to print your images so that they look the same in the print as they do on the screen, you're in a different world. There is no way that's going to happen. The printer that I've got there, that's a 10 ink system. The one I want to get after that is like a 12 or a 15 ink system, I think it is. The reason there's all those different colours in there is so that the prints do have and can cope with all that different tonal range within your image. A 4 ink printer isn't going to cut it. All right, so that's just one thing that I wanted to say there. So right, let's just dive straight in and talk about what we need to do. So we're talking about the calibration. Now I'm gonna put something up on the screen now, and you might not like this, but this is true. All right, this. If your prints are too dark, your monitor isn't calibrated correctly. That is it. There is no ifs, no buts. It's as simple as that. All right. So what is it about the calibration that we need to do? Now, I showed you, I'll go to my desktop now, that when I do my calibration, I tend to use this software here. I use the X-Rite calibrators, so I use the X-Rite software, and I've got the i1 Studio. Now, my BenQ monitor does come, they do actually provide some software called Palette Master, which is their calibration stuff, but I'll be honest with you, my mindset is if I want my calibration hardware to work at its optimum, then I will use the software that was created for that piece of hardware. All right. But let's have a quick look at this. So no matter what software and hardware you're using, you're going to find that pretty much the settings are going to be the same. They just might be in a different place, or they might be called something different, but it's going to pretty much be the same kind of thing. So let me just dive over to where it says display calibration just here. Now, we're not going to go through the whole process of doing it, but it's just the settings that I want to show you, because I don't know how clear that's going to be at the moment. The most important one here is the luminance. All right, let me just actually show the video I showed last week. Very short one. This is where my luminance value, as it zooms in, you'll see my luminance value there is a value of 90. Now, with the luminance, the main thing to remember here is the higher the number the luminance, you're going to use that when a room is really, really bright. So if I was in a room that had lots and lots of light, it was like proper nuclear in here, I'd probably take the luminance value to 120 or even higher. So that basically means that luminance value is coping with the environment that it's in. Now, because my room, I don't generally work in a room that is particularly bright. I've got daylight balanced bulbs, but I do like to have the lights quite dim, and I've got a blackout blind as well with a window to my right. So my room is quite dark, so my luminance value needs to be lower. Okay, so my luminance last time when you saw the last presentation we did, the luminance value, as you can see on screen now, was 90. Now, since we did that one last time, I've now changed it. My luminance value now is 80. All right, so I've dropped it down even more to 80. Now, for when I'm actually, using the screen, even when I'm not doing prints, taking that luminance value, the brightness value, if you like, of that screen, still looks fantastic. When I'm just using it for browsing the web and all that kind of stuff, it still looks great. In fact, in the room environment I'm in now, it looks bang on. All right, so my luminance value needed to be lower. Now, why have I lowered it, and why has that made such a big difference? I'll show you it on the screen in a moment, but if you did see the last presentation, you'll remember that once we'd done the calibration, once we'd profiled the paper, we then jumped into Lightroom to do the printing. Okay, and you might remember that there was a couple of settings that I changed at the very, very end, brightness and contrast. Now, because I've changed the luminance value of my screen, I no longer have to do that. No more guesswork. It is absolutely bang on. All right, so that's that there. Now, let me just take you through a couple of extra little videos here. You'll remember that once we then started to do the calibration process, we talked about where the calibrator needs to be situated. Ideally, you're going to probably want to put it, like you can see on my screen here, with my calibrator pretty much in the middle of the screen. Now, again, this isn't an advert for BenQ or anything like that, but this new monitor I'm using, the luminance value across the whole screen is pretty much damn accurate across the whole screen. So if I put it in the middle, if I put it in the top left, bottom right, wherever, the brightness and the tonal range and whatever is going to be exactly the same. Some screens may be of a brand that, cheaper maybe. It's like one of those things, isn't it, that you buy cheap, you buy twice. If a screen isn't really up to it, you're going to find that wherever you put that calibrator, it's going to give you slightly different readings. So put it right in the middle, all right? Put it right in the middle, because that's generally where your pictures are going to be when you're working on them, isn't it? In the middle of your screen. So once we've got that position, we then went through the whole process of doing the calibration. Again, this is going to be pretty much standard for whatever it is that your software and hardware you're using. You'll get to the process where you start to do this. The first thing that the X-Rite software does, it checks the contrast of the screen. And that's what it's kind of doing right now. You can just about make out there's a few variations in it. And obviously now you can see the red and what have you. Now, once it's done that, it does the contrast, then it checks the white point. And you get these 3 bars, which kind of remind me of Knight Rider. I remember years ago, you had like 3 bars when Kit was talking. Maybe that's just me. But you want to ideally have 3 ticks where the orange bar is going to be right across the middle. And that's going to say, yep, your contrast, your white point is bang on. Now, if you can adjust the red, green and blue values on your monitor by pressing buttons, that is when you'd probably alter them now to make it so that you get 3 ticks. If you can't, the software will work it out what it needs to change that white point value to be so that it's accurate. So you do that, then you would click next. It would then check the brightness value of your screen. Now you remember before that I put my luminance value, the value that I want it to be 80. So when it takes a reading, it'll tell me what the target white luminance value is, and it'll then say what the actual measured luminance value is. And then you would just adjust, if you had to, the brightness up or the brightness down so that you got that orange bar right across the middle and a nice green tick. So that's saying, yep, you've now lowered the luminance, the brightness value of your screen to what you wanted it to be to match the room and the environment that you're working on it in when you're doing all your stuff. All right, so that's that. And then after that one, you would then go through the process. Once you've done all those little bits, the contrast, the white balance and the brightness value, it would then go through and start to do all the color patches. Okay, it would kind of do the readings, and that's pretty kind of standard. Once it's done that, your job's a good one. All right, that's kind of done that sort of stuff there. Right, so that's that. All right, just a quick overview about what we did with the calibrating of the screen. But like I said, the most important thing is this: if you find that your prints are too dark, it's because your luminance value of your screen is too high. End of. All right, what you do not want to be doing really, and it kind of contradicts what we did last week, but I want to kind of bring it up a little bit here and kind of show you extra little stuff that I'm learning about all this, because now, I was happy last week, I am ecstatic now with prints, and I'll show you why in a short while. But it really is, if your things aren't working correctly, your luminance value 99.9% of the time is too high, so you need to bring it down. All right, so now that we've done that, right, so we'll go through the whole calibration process. Once we've done that, we're then going to start looking at profiling the papers. Now, last week I did say to you, you've got choices. You can buy your papers just like I do here. The papers that I use, I tend to use Permajet, not sponsored by them, not affiliated with them. I just like their stuff. Because actually, to be honest with you, the person I met when I was at a show was really nice on the Permajet stand. So that goes a long way. Being nice goes a long way. So I now use their stuff. So when you choose whatever papers it is that you want to use, it might be the Canon papers if you're using a Canon printer. It might be, you know, Hahnemühle. It might be Permajet. It might be whatever sort of papers that you want to use. You do have the option of downloading a profile for that paper to put into whatever software you're using, like Lightroom. Print it, job's a good one. But like I kind of said last week, that has never worked for me. Never in a million years has it worked for me. And I don't think it really would do. Because let's think about this logically. You know, I've calibrated my screen to my environment. I then download a profile for a certain paper to print an image from my computer. But that profile for that paper to tell my computer how to behave and what have you has been created by a completely different person on a completely different printer to get these values and what have you. So how could that possibly give me the correct results? It might be okay, but for me it certainly wasn't, but it's never going to be nailed. So you've got two options there then. If you're not going to do that, which I wouldn't advise you do what you want, but I'm going to advise you not to do that. You've got two choices, and that is to have bespoke paper profiles, okay? And you can either send off for them or do them yourself. Now, if you're going to send off for them, for example, here we've got Permajet, okay? Permajet, I'll go onto their website and they will create ICC or these paper profiles for you. They contacted me after the last video and were kind of talking about this, saying that they are incredibly proud of the kind of profiles they create, pretty damn accurate. And I'm in the middle of testing it just out of curiosity, to be honest with you. But what you would do is they would send you a file, like a grid of square color grid. You'd print it, and then you'd post that to them. Then they'd create a profile from it. And that's great. But obviously with that comes the limitations of the fact that you might want to do the printing now, but you've got to do a print, send it off, wait for it to come back and all that kind of stuff. Well, they'll send you like a profile in an email. I personally like to have complete control over this. That's why I brought the printer. I want to see the process through the whole thing from capture, edit, print. I want to do all that myself, because then I'm the only one to blame if it all goes wrong. All right. So let's talk then about the paper profiles. All right. How do we create these paper profiles? And I want to let's just dive back. Let's go back onto my screen here. Let's go back to home. And I'm now going to dive over again to the process that I showed you last week when we were doing the creation of the paper profiles. So the process would be, I would click on color print, and then you get this kind of grid here. All right. On the left hand side, this is when you choose the printer that you want to use, choose the paper size. I would suggest, if you're going to be printing these grids out to scan, if you're going to be doing that yourself, do it on an A4 piece of paper as opposed to an A3, because, obviously you're going to be using a lot more ink and a lot more expensive paper if you print it out on A3. So just do them on A4, all right? And then give it a bit of a description. And then you're going to press print. But this is the important thing. This is probably this is it. This is the second of the golden nuggets, all right? If I press print now, when I press that, and again, it might kind of vary with your own system, but you'll have the option now to choose the printer and go into the printer preferences. All right, so I'm now choosing the Canon Pro 10S, and I'm going to click on preferences for this particular printer. And this is the preferences now that, so I can decide now, because one thing we need to remember is that our printer driver will also influence color, because it's got like its own kind of profile built into it. So I need to kind of tell it, listen, I want to print out these color squares without any influence from anything. I just want to see what you print them out like, completely raw and untouched. So I need to tell the printer, do not do anything to this except for printing it. All right. So I go into the preferences. Now you might find if you're using the Canon, it'll say standard. Now we're doing photo printing. So we're going to click on photo printing. I'll turn off borderless. I don't really like to do that. But then this is one here. It says color and then / intensify manual adjustment. If I double click on that, it brings up this manual adjustment. And then there's a tab here called matching. And you see here it says color correction. Now, by default, it says driver matching, which means that the printer itself, the driver for this printer, is going to apply some kind of an adjustment, some kind of a color profile as it's printing it all out. We don't want it to do that. So what I'm going to do is choose none. So there's absolutely no influence whatsoever. And I'll click OK. Now, I think this bottom bit here, now when I say this, I think this is more, I don't think I'm on my own when it comes to this, but this is where I think the printing gets confusing, or potentially can get confusing, because we've done all this correct here. We've chosen photo printing. We've told the printer not to do any color management at all, but now we're being asked what media type. And this is where, again, it might just be me. I then started to think, hold on a second, it's asking me what paper I'm using. Does that mean it's going to apply like a profile to that paper? Is it all built in? Now, it's not, all right? The only reason for this bottom section here where it says media type is so that you can tell the printer what kind of paper is coming through it, so that the printer knows how much ink it needs to use to put onto that piece of paper to get a good print. All right. It's kind of like, I was trying to think of how could I equate this to something else. I guess in a way, imagine now you've got a piece of white cotton, for example, a nice piece of white cotton, and I'm going to stretch that out so it's nice and flat and stretched out like this, and I can see the top and I can see the bottom. And in my hands here, I've got a little dropper full of ink. And I'm going to drop a little bit of ink onto that cotton, and I want to be able to see the ink coming through the inside from the underside. Now, as I drop that ink onto it, I might not see it, so I might need to add a little bit more ink, and eventually I can see it. Now, if I had a thinner piece of cotton just stretched across it, maybe even a piece of toilet tissue or something like that, and I drop the ink onto it, it's going to take less ink hitting that paper for me to be able to see it coming through the reverse side. Does that make sense? So this bit at the bottom here is purely so that you can tell your printer this is the paper that's coming through, so you know how much ink it needs to put down to get a good print. And of course, if we're paying our money for our printers here, we want to make sure we would set it to high. All right. So photo printing, turn off the color management here. So make it sure it says none. choose the paper that you want to use, choose print quality, high, and then click OK. Now, let me just dive back to me just for a second, because this, again, is something else that's really relevant. You might find that, as I did, when it comes to, you get your papers and you're just all excited to do your print, so you score the box open, you get it out, you feed it into a printer, you go through all this kind of stuff, and you press print and you're like, yeah, it's okay, it's kind of looking all right. Slow down is what I would say, because within that box you're going to probably find a piece of paper that looks like this. This is the piece of paper that's within the Permajet piece of paper. Sorry, the Permajet box. And what this piece of paper does, this is like seriously important. In fact, it's so important, if I just bring this here, I now keep these in a plastic folder. They're all the same, but I just keep in case I lose one. And what this piece of paper does here, it tells you, it's got a list on one side of lots and lots and lots of all the different papers that Permajet produce. Now, it then says, okay, if you're going to use something like Permajet's FB Gold Silk, okay, this is what you need to tell the printer to use, or a similar kind of paper to use, because when we go to media type, can you see that if here, it doesn't say Permajet FB Gold Silk. Oh, let's dive over there. When we dive into here, it doesn't say Permajet FB Gold Silk. So what this piece of paper does, what have I got here? That's what I mean, yeah. So what this piece of paper does is tells you, if you're going to use Permajet FB Gold Silk, then in the drop down menu there, you want to use, say here, photo paper plus semi gloss. So that will basically tell the printer how much ink to lay down. Does that make sense? Because you know, a lot of times people think that when it comes to choosing the media type here, that in there they will see the profiles for their paper. That's never going to happen. The only things you're going to see in here are what Canon loads in with its own particular driver for the Canon papers. There are some kind of like alternatives it gives you here, like fine art papers, but this is basically Canon saying, if you're using a non-Canon paper, then check with your paper manufacturer to say which one of ours it recommends you use when you're printing. All right? Does that make sense so far? So what differences have we made? Okay, when we think about the one we did last week, what differences have we done this time? Number one is we've changed the luminance value of our monitor. We've lowered it. All right. The next thing we've done, when we printed out those colored grids, in fact, let me just show you what video is it here, number 6 I think it is. These colored grids here that we're now going to scan, we've done it with no color management whatsoever. All right, the printer's printing them out raw, and as it's doing that, in the software you'll see that each line is then kind of like scored through to say you had a successful scan. Now what's interesting with this is when you look at these grid here, where it gets this horizontal line, or sorry, diagonal line appearing through it as it does a successful scan, what that's basically telling you is this: in the top left hand is what you should have. Okay, that's the color you should have on the print. The bottom right of that diagonal line is what the value of the color is that you actually have, that you printed out. So the printer and the software now go, right, I know what you should have had, i.e. top left. This is what you're actually getting, top right. So I now need to know what kind of profile I've got to make so that you do get what you should get. All right, so we do that, and then we kind of go through the second scan. We get the second scan, so we get 2. You'll do the first one, you'll scan it, then you do the second one, and then you get your profile created, and that's what you then put into Lightroom to then do your print. But let's give you a quick break from my voice, or show you a quick BenQ advert, and then we'll dive into Lightroom for the final finishing touch to show how it all comes together. Alrighty, so now we're in Lightroom. Alright, so we've done all this stuff. Now let's get to the crux of the matter here. What we really want to do is get these prints. What on earth do we need to do? Now you might remember, let's see if I can see where this is. Was it number 9? I think I've got to press. Where's my little grid? Yeah, number 9. Right, so last week when I showed you that we printed this out, this was the print settings within Lightroom. So you can see that the color management section there, I'm choosing the profile of the paper that I created. All right. And then where it says print adjustment, you notice there that I had to increase it by +20. And then because I was using a fine art paper, which is kind of like got a lot of texture into it there, I needed to boost the contrast. Now that is not the case anymore. All right. Not the case anymore. So now when I'm printing, and again, I can't quite zoom into it as it is at the moment, but you'll see they're down in the bottom right hand corner here, pretty much the same settings. Resolution 300, print sharpening. I don't tend to add that. Some people do, but I tend to just leave it. But in the color management section here you can see I've got my particular profile. I've got a number of different profiles here: FB Gold Silk, Portrait Rag, and Portrait White. For a quick refresh for those from last week, if you don't know where your paper profile goes once you've created it, if you just click Other, it'll bring up the actual area within your computer to say, here's all your paper profiles. You would just simply put a tick next to the one that you want and click OK, and it would then bring it back over into here. Now, so that's the Portrait Rag is the paper that I'm going to be using. The intent here, you've got perceptual or relative. Relative is the best choice to use if what you're printing has colors that are within that range, of that gamut range. If you've got an image that's got like seriously wacky, crazy, far out kind of colors in it, you're going to want to go for perceptual. But pretty much most of the time for your normal kind of photography, you're going to want to kind of go for the relative there. Now, print adjustment, can you see here? I've got nothing. I've got no brightness, no contrast in there at all. So what I would then do when I'm now going to print this image out, I've got the options at the bottom, print or printer. I'm going to go to printer. All right. This then brings up this little dialog box where I can choose what printer I want to use. Obviously for me, I'm going to be using the Canon Pro 10. Then I would click on properties, and you've got to do this every time to make sure that the settings haven't kind of reset. Always check on this. So yeah, we can see photo printing is what we're set to. The color intensity manual adjustment here has got a tick in it, but let's just double click on the wording to bring up the dialog box and go to the matching section where it says color correction, and you can see here it says none, which is exactly what we want, because we only want to be influencing the print by the actual paper profile we've created. If I had left that there, let's just open that back up again actually. If I'd have left it to what it would have been maybe by default where it says driver matching, that's going to cause a bit of a conflict, because Lightroom's going to go, right, I know how you want to print this out, so we're going to use your Portrait Rag profile. Away you go. And it kind of sends it down the line until it gets to the printer. Then the printer goes, hold on a second. We also want to use this. We're going to use this profile as well. So you can imagine if you've got two different profiles competing against each other, you're not going to get the best result. So you only want to use the one that you've spent the time and money creating or buying. You want to use that profile, not the ones in the printer. So you just tell the printer, do as you're told. Print out using the profile I've created. So turn the color correction in the printer to none and click OK. This is where you would then choose the particular paper. Now let's just say if I was going to use, let's have a look here, Portrait Rag, I would then go to that piece of paper from Permajet, read across there to say, right, I want to use this particular brand of paper from Permajet. What do you recommend I use from the Canon drop down menu here? It'll tell me. I'll choose that. Then we go for print quality high. Then we click OK and we print. It is as simple as that. And when I say that, I really do hope that was simple, because once I'd done this, bearing in mind up until last week, I was doing slight adjustments with the brightness and the contrast and what have you. When I then did this, I made no adjustments within Lightroom, and I thought, right, let's just see how it prints out. And check this out. I did, in fact, I can find an image for you. Let's just cancel that. Let's just find you this image. Go to my screen just here. This one just here. So this is an image I created a while ago. Let's just go to there. And I kind of made this. I just brought some flowers from a florist, put a bit of grey paper behind them, photographed them, then edited it. And that print I did without any of the adjustments within the printer driver. Just went through the process I've just explained to you. And when it printed it out, I got that. Absolutely no adjustments. Let's hope it focuses. No adjustments to it whatsoever. The colours are bang on. The brightness is bang on compared to what I've got on my screen as well, with no extra adjustments in that Lightroom dialog. So I've kind of like just given it the profile, hands off, and let it print, and that's what it did. I also printed out the images of the veteran just here. Let's just bring this in. Now, this one here I've got, this small one on this A4, this is on FB Gold Silk. So that paper the properties of that paper do add a little bit of warmth to it. But even so, with no adjustments, let's hope that kind of focuses. Let's have a look. It's kind of doing it. Absolutely bang on. I mean, that it does not get better than that when you're printing. I've even printed it onto one of the fine art papers from Permajet, and before I was having to increase the contrast because I was finding that the actual, the texture and the sort of extreme matte of this particular paper was drawing out the contrast and all that kind of stuff. But this is it printed out on an A3 with absolutely no extra adjustments to it. That is just the profile that has done it. I mean, look, down in the shadow area, great detail, skin tone's fantastic. I just simply could not be happier. Could not be happier. I am absolutely over the moon with it. So yeah, all those years ago when I couldn't do it and I didn't understand, really, when we think about it, there was only a couple of key things which were completely wrecking it for me. The first one was the brightness, the luminance value of my screen. The other one mainly was to do with the fact that, and it sounds really daft when you say it now, you think, how did you not think of that? I think it's the way that it's all laid out. The dialog boxes can be confusing. You think you're using a profile when you're not, and blah, 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 blah. I was using a profile in Lightroom, but I was also using a profile in the printer. The two of them were giving it that. They were at loggerheads and they're going, right, okay, we'll have that then. If that's what you want to do, you can have this print. And of course it was rubbish, which is why I stopped doing it years and years and years ago. Thankfully now, no longer the case. Alright, so there you go. Like I said, a very, very quick overview of the process to make sure that when you do your printing, what you end up with on that paper is what you actually see on the screen. And that's all we want, isn't it? There is so much more information I could give you. Don't forget to download that free printing guide from my website over at glynjewis.com, and also check out the video that I refer to in this session over on my YouTube channel. That was done as a YouTube live broadcast going back some time ago now. But there you go. Happy printing, and I'll catch you next time.